walk into HMP Garth and you immediately feel the weight of stasis, a kind of institutional exhaustion that seeps into every wing, every cell, every sentence. This is a high-security prison designed to hold adult men convicted of some of the most serious crimes, yet what the 2024 inspection revealed is a facility not only overwhelmed by violence and drug misuse, but one that appears to have lost faith in its own ability to change. Garth, a Category B long-term prison holding around 800 men, was once seen as a flagship for control and stability in the high-security estate. But the veneer has cracked. The reality now is a jail on the brink, where high levels of self-harm, brutal gang conflicts, and widespread drug abuse coexist with broken rehabilitation efforts and disillusioned staff. Safety is in rapid decline. Violence has exploded in both volume and severity, with prisoners wielding makeshift weapons in targeted attacks. Some incidents were so serious that victims required emergency transfers to outside hospitals. Gang allegiances have hardened, and debt-related bullying, often tied to drug smuggling or illicit trading on the wings, has made life unbearable for more vulnerable inmates. Staff themselves are now primary targets. One officer had boiling water thrown in his face, others face daily threats. The prison has failed to contain this rise in violence, let alone reverse it. Drugs are everywhere. Despite increased use of body scanners, searches, and external intelligence, the prison has been unable to stop the flow of synthetic cannabinoids, spice, diverted medications, and smuggled tobacco and vapes. Spice use has become normalized on certain wings, with prisoners collapsing in corridors or vomiting in showers while staff struggle to respond in time. The situation is compounded by poor medical support and unreliable emergency procedures. Some prisoners are routinely left to ride out overdoses in their cells. The regime is threadbare. Garth, like many of its peers, is failing to provide prisoners with anything resembling a full, structured day. On most wings, prisoners are locked up for over 22 hours daily. Time out of cell is a privilege that exists largely on paper. Purposeful activity has collapsed into a skeleton rota of cancelled education, work assignments with no staff supervision, and waiting lists so long they effectively bar entry to rehabilitation altogether. The workshops, once places where men could gain real qualifications, now sit mostly idle. Education delivery is patchy at best. Even prisoners who want to attend often miss out due to staff shortages, poor communication, or late unlocks. Those who do go find themselves handed uninspiring worksheets or being taught material far below their level. One lifer described education at Garth as primary school work in a maximum security cage. The mental health crisis inside Garth is also spiraling. 1 in 3 prisoners is on antidepressants or antipsychotic medication. Waiting times to see psychiatric staff stretch into months. Some of the most unwell prisoners are held in segregation units with no therapeutic input, where conditions are bleak and isolation compounds their psychological decline. Staff openly admitted they are not equipped to deal with the scale of trauma and psychiatric instability now routine in the population. Living conditions are another layer of degradation. On several wings, inspectors reported blocked toilets, broken cell windows, and graffiti-covered walls. In some areas, men were living without working heating or ventilation. Laundry was irregular, sanitary products were limited. Cells stank of damp and body odor, a constant reminder of how little the outside world seems to care. There is also a growing leadership vacuum. Governors have changed frequently, and many staff, particularly newer recruits, feel abandoned and directionless. Morale has plummeted. Communication between departments is fractured. Systems designed to support progression and resettlement are non-functional. Even the basic personal officer scheme, where every prisoner should have a named staff contact, was inactive on many wings. Despite all of this, Garth continues to claim a rehabilitative mission, but that mission has become a cruel joke. Lifers, stuck in endless cycles of bureaucracy, can't access the courses they need for parole. Men who've completed 5 years without incident still languish in high security conditions because the paperwork hasn't caught up. The offender management unit is so under-resourced that some prisoners haven't had a sentence planning review in over 2 years. And what about progression? What about release? Garth is supposed to prepare men for a return to society, but it doesn't. It warehouses them, holds them, stalls them, breaks them down, one day at a time. Now ask yourself, why are we keeping hundreds of men in crumbling cells under lockdown regimes with no education, no progression, and no purpose? What happens when a prison turns into a storage unit for society's most dangerous, and then stops even pretending to rehabilitate them? And when the next man is released from Garth with no plan, no support and no change, who will be held accountable? Let us know your thoughts, because HMP Garth isn't just failing, it's creating the very danger it was built to contain. When 26-year-old Olivia Hodgson walked through the gates of HMP Garth each day, she was entrusted with upholding the rule of law, maintaining security, and serving as a bulwark between the public and some of the most dangerous men in the country. What no one realized, at least not at first, was that she had been hiding a dark secret, a forbidden romantic relationship with a convicted murderer serving a life sentence inside the very prison where she worked. In July 2023, Hodgson of Leyland, Lancashire, was sentenced to 8 months in prison after pleading guilty to misconduct in a public office. Her relationship with LaVarn Ford Morgan, a man convicted of a fatal shotgun murder in 2010, had not only breached the trust placed in her as a prison officer, but had actively endangered the operational integrity of one of the UK's most notorious high-security prisons. The story began in early 2020. Hodgson, who had been working at HMP Garth since 2017, struck up an inappropriate relationship with Mr. Ford Morgan. What started as small personal interactions quickly escalated into smuggled contraband, secret communications, and a deeply compromising emotional entanglement. She supplied mobile phones to Mr. Ford Morgan, using multiple burner phones and encrypted messaging apps to stay in contact with him after he was transferred to a different prison. Despite her efforts to conceal the relationship, prison intelligence picked up on suspicious behaviour. In January 2021, a cell search led to the discovery of 2 phones linked to Miss Hodgson. The content of those devices, including intimate messages, voice notes, and video calls, revealed the extent of their bond. Further investigations included a raid on Hodgson's home in July 2021, which turned up a birthday card sent to her by Mr. Ford Morgan. His fingerprints were found on the card, physical proof of the inappropriate relationship between the officer and the inmate. At Burnley Crown Court, the prosecution laid out a clear picture of premeditated and calculated misconduct. Miss Hodgson had taken active steps to evade detection. She used pseudonyms, changed phone numbers frequently, and worked to circumvent the prison's security systems. Her actions went far beyond a momentary lapse in judgment. They were deliberate and sustained over a prolonged period. The judge, in handing down her sentence, acknowledged that Miss Hodgson had no previous convictions and expressed some sympathy for her vulnerability, but he also made it clear that her behaviour amounted to a gross abuse of public trust. As a prison officer, Miss Hodgson was not just a civilian with a badge. She was a figure of authority with unique access to prisoners, sensitive information, and the internal workings of the justice system. Her failure to maintain those boundaries placed lives at risk. Meanwhile, LaVarn Ford Morgan, already serving a life sentence for his part in the shooting death of a man in 2010, was handed an additional 18-month sentence for his part in the illicit relationship and for possessing contraband mobile phones in prison. His manipulation of a staff member was not seen as passive. It was active, orchestrated, and knowingly exploitative. Detective Constable Becky Pearson from the Northwest Regional Organised Crime Unit described the incident as a flagrant breach of duty. This was an abuse of the public's trust in the prison service, she said, It undermines the hard work of thousands of dedicated staff who do their job with professionalism and integrity every day. We will continue to root out corruption at every level. HMP Garth, where the relationship began, has a troubled reputation. The Category B men's prison houses some of the most dangerous prisoners in the UK, including murderers, gang members, and those convicted of serious organised crime. In recent years, the prison has made headlines for violent incidents, drug trafficking, and other staff prisoner misconduct cases, raising urgent questions about oversight and culture within such high-pressure institutions. The Hodgson Ford Morgan affair is more than just a tabloid scandal. It speaks to broader systemic problems within the prison system. Problems of inadequate staff vetting, emotional vulnerability, and the psychological toll of working in environments where power dynamics are constantly being tested. It also underscores the danger of complacency when it comes to professional boundaries. Some argue that Miss Hodgson was emotionally exploited, manipulated by a prisoner with a history of calculated violence and no meaningful prospects for release. Others suggest she willingly abandoned her responsibilities, prioritizing emotional gratification over the safety of her colleagues and the integrity of her workplace. The truth may lie somewhere in between, but the consequences remain undeniable. The case has prompted renewed calls for better staff support, including psychological screening and resilience training for prison officers. It has also highlighted the ease with which contraband, especially mobile phones, can still enter high-security prisons, often with the help of insiders. Olivia Hodgson, once a trusted employee of the prison service, now serves time as an inmate. Her name joins a growing list of officers who crossed the line, blurring the boundary between duty and desire, professionalism and personal failure. For HMP Garth and the wider prison system, the scandal serves as both a warning and a wake-up call that inside the prison walls, emotional compromise can be just as dangerous as any weapon. In a harrowing case that highlights the mental health crisis and culture of coercion inside UK prisons, a convicted murderer found dead in his cell at HMP Garth in 2016 took his own life after reportedly being bullied by fellow inmates and pressured into attacking prison staff. The revelations were confirmed in a damning Prisons and Probation Ombudsman (PPO) report released years later, which raised critical failings in how the prison responded to signs of escalating distress. Wesley Rowlands, aged 33, was serving a life sentence for the brutal 2012 killing of David Lavender, a father of three beaten to death during a pub crawl in Chester after objecting to Rowlands urinating on a pub landlady's dog. He was ordered to serve a minimum of 15 years behind bars, but life inside proved just as turbulent as the one that led him to prison. Before arriving at HMP Garth, Rowlands had already demonstrated volatility, notably attacking a prison officer with a homemade blade while housed at HMP Walton in 2015, earning him an additional 2 years to his sentence. Following a 7-month stint in a secure hospital, he was transferred to Garth, a high-security prison in Leyland, Lancashire, known for housing men serving indeterminate and life sentences. His downward spiral began almost immediately after his arrival in November 2015. By March 2016, staff were aware of threats against him, mostly related to alleged debts he had incurred or inherited from a former cellmate. After expressing fears for his safety, he was moved from A Wing to C Wing. Within 2 weeks, he was moved again. In April 2016, Rowlands reported being bullied and told staff he didn't feel safe attending the prison workshop. The next day, he appeared with a broken nose, claiming it was from a play fight. Though staff suspected otherwise, no conclusive findings emerged. The PPO noted that incidents involving alleged bullying or violence were often left unrecorded or inadequately followed up. On May 31st, Rowlands again raised the alarm. He told a prison officer that he was being threatened over an old debt and that he was being coerced into attacking staff and other prisoners. he explicitly stated that the psychological pressure was worsening his mental health. He requested a transfer to B Wing, considered a safe wing by inmates under threat, but was told that he'd have to fill out an application. Instead, he was temporarily moved to E Wing, despite being diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and being prescribed medication. Concerns about Rowlands' mental well-being continued to grow. On September 5th, he was found collapsed in his cell. A fellow prisoner believed he had overdosed on his medication. Though Rowlands later denied attempting self-harm, fellow inmates said he had made cryptic remarks about leaving soon. The PPO report identified this episode as a critical missed opportunity. Despite the overdose, no heightened suicide prevention measures were put in place, and he was not monitored under an ACCT, assessment, care in custody and teamwork process designed for inmates at risk of self-harm. Officers reported that Rowlands appeared happy and chirpy and noted he would continue working with his key worker. But just over a month later, on October 14th, 2016, Wesley Rowlands was found dead in his cell. He had hanged himself overnight. 2 suicide notes were discovered, one a heartfelt apology to friends, family and staff, expressing remorse for the crimes he had committed and gratitude for the support he had received. The other was more telling, a list of names and prison numbers next to various amounts of money, believed to be a record of debts, either owed by Rowlands or by others to him. It confirmed the claim that he had been under relentless pressure from other inmates. The PPO investigation concluded that prison staff failed on multiple levels. The overdose incident a month prior was not adequately investigated. There were frailties in suicide and self-harm monitoring procedures. Despite multiple warnings from Rowlands himself, including claims that he was being manipulated into violent behavior, staff did not escalate his concerns or take meaningful action to investigate the bullying. Prison officers reportedly did not challenge the alleged perpetrators, nor did they move Rowlands to the safer unit he had requested. The report made several recommendations, including ensuring staff are trained to properly identify, log, and act on signs of bullying and suicide risk. The prison was also advised to fully implement the ACCT system and ensure staff can recognize signs of distress that may not appear imminent, but are nonetheless serious. In response, a spokesperson for the prison service said, "Our thoughts remain with the family and friends of Mr. Rowlands. Since his death, we have improved staff training and implemented a scheme to ensure the most vulnerable receive one-to-one support." The tragic death of Wesley Rowlands stands as a case study in how vulnerable prisoners can be left to deteriorate under the weight of peer pressure, unresolved trauma, and institutional blind spots. His story raises urgent questions about how prisons like HMP Garth handle mental illness, bullying, and staff-prisoner communication, especially in complex environments where debt, dominance, and intimidation are deeply entrenched. Rowlands' death was not just a suicide, it was the endpoint of a long, visible descent into despair, one that might have been prevented if someone had truly listened.